Hello, I'm Katie Stamler. I'm the water quality scientist at the Essex Region Conservation Authority. This is a recording of a presentation that was delivered on the 29th of January, 2025 in the town of Essex. Um, Presenting alongside me at that time was Emma Arnu, who is the watershed stewardship technician at ERCA, as well as Dr. Catherine Fabria at the Healthy Headwaters Lab at the University of Windsor. The purpose of the meeting that we held on the 29th was to be an information exchange between the Conservation Authority, the Healthy Headwaters Lab, and our agricultural community. So the way that we structured that meeting was that we had updates from ERCA and HHL, the Healthy Headwaters Lab. And then we had four different interactive stations where we solicited information from our agricultural community and others that were in attendance to help us understand better people's thoughts about our grant program, partnership and research, communications, future events and learning opportunities. And then we had a lovely dinner and networking and did some wrapping up. So this is recording is for those who weren't able to make it or those who may want to watch it again. So if you're not familiar with the Conservation Authority model, probably many of you listening who are in the Essex region have heard of ERCA. The Essex Region Conservation Authority is one of 36 conservation authorities in Ontario. We're unique in that we are watershed based. We're not, we don't follow political boundaries like municipal or county. We are instead delineated by the way that water flows. The program that we'll be focusing on largely in this presentation is the Great Lakes Freshwater Ecosystem Initiative, and this is funding from the federal government to help us reduce phosphorus. And other conservation authorities in southwestern Ontario also receive funding from this program, mainly the Upper Thames, Lower Thames, and St. Clair. So you might hear from your neighbors about the programs that they're running as well. So why we talk about phosphorus and agricultural areas and why we have to do those reductions. I'm sure at this point, many of us have heard about the harmful algal blooms in the western basin of Lake Erie. We know from the science that the size and severity, so the total amount of an algal bloom and how big it is really determined by how much phosphorus enters into the system, largely in the springtime through runoff. We also have persistent annual harmful algal blooms that happen on the southern shore of Lake St. Clair, which butts up against the northern part of the Essex region. And we know that harmful algal bloom also creates pretty high concentrations of toxins. So we do want to get a handle on reducing algal blooms in both Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie. And why the conservation authorities that received the funding, why we did, is that you can see our major rivers all outlet into either Lake St. Clair, the Detroit River, or Lake Erie. And then to put another layer on it, these yellow dots here are where we have drinking water intakes, particularly in the Essex region and then as well here in Wheatley. And we can see that a lot of them are situated in areas that might be affected by harmful algal blooms. We know from the science, and that this pie chart here is from the Maumee River, but it's really very representative of other watersheds as well. We can, identify what the point sources are of phosphorus and non-point sources. We know from science done back in the 1960s and 70s that phosphorus is the limiting nutrient for growth. And knowing that when algal blooms were persistent in Lake Erie before, we reduced phosphorus from wastewater treatment plants. I took it out of detergents, those sorts of things. And we know that about 85% of phosphorus now enters our systems through non-point source runoff. So anytime that there's water hitting the surface and running over and there's not a single pipe or source where you might be able to stop that. And that's not to say that these are bad practices or anything like that. It's just that that's the cumulative effect because of how large that land use is. And we know that we have that goal through the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement of reducing phosphorus by 40% more than we have already reduced it. So watersheds in the Essex region, if you're watching at home, maybe take a little minute here to think about where your home or your farms might be and what watersheds they're in. So the Ruscombe, Bell, Pike, Puce, these guys all drain out into Lake St. Clair. Little River, Turkey Creek, and the Canard all drain out into the Detroit River. Big Creek, Cedar Creek, Weigel Creek, Mill, Sturgeon, and all these other lovely places throughout Leamington all drain south into Lake Erie. So what we know about phosphorus in the Essex region. So we're talking here about total phosphorus, which is the form of phosphorus that is sediment bound, and it's kind of how we start to tell our story about phosphorus. Um, we know that our phosphorus concentrations are some of the highest in the province. It's to be expected, given that we have such a high agricultural use. We shouldn't expect to achieve those A's and B scores. The provincial water quality objective is 0.03 milligrams per liter, and you can see the difference based on what we're seeing there. Importantly, we know that we're not striving to achieve 0.03 milligrams per liter because that's more like what you would find in a forested watershed. But we do want to try to get these watersheds that have failing grades and bring them up into D's or possibly C's. And then of course you can see from the data that there's a very different story happening down here in the Leamington tributaries, and that is a different area of focus for us to address. But here in this presentation and in this program, largely we're focusing on row crop agriculture. So we have some data from our local streams. So these data are from the Wago Creek watershed, and it's taken over several years. So these are water years. Water years start on October 1st and go to September 30th. So we have several different water years. We take routine events, so we go out every 2 weeks, regardless of what the weather conditions are. And then we also sample during runoff events, so rain or snow melt or anything like that. The green line there is showing you what the provincial water quality objective is, so we can see obviously that we're above that. But the main thing that we learned from this is that the highest total phosphorus concentrations happen during the non-growing season, so late fall and through to April or May, that we see those highest concentrations during the non-growing season during those runoff events. And this is what we expect to see. This is very common in any agricultural watershed. It's just really lovely to have that data from our own backyard so we can show that that is the same kind of pattern that we see here. And that's why you'll often hear us targeting things that take place in the winter, like cover crops and that sort of stuff, where we're trying to reduce erosion during those big events. Contrast that to the information that we have about those Leamington tributaries, where we know one of the big contributing land uses is greenhouse. We do the same thing. We sample once every 2 weeks, and then we also sample during those runoff events. We have that split into the same growing and non-growing season that we use for row crop agriculture to keep things even. So we're still talking basically summer months through late fall to early spring. And the difference here that we see is that the highest total phosphorus concentrations happen during routine sampling in the growing season. So during those base flow conditions is when we see the highest concentrations, and we get a bit of a dilution effect when we have a runoff event. And that tells us that we have a very different situation happening in those watersheds, and that maybe we have point sources that we can get a better control of. The last thing to draw to your attention is the difference in the scales. So on our y-axis here is showing total phosphorus concentrations. In our agricultural streams, it's up at 1.8 as our high concentrations. And in those Leamington tributaries, we see 4.5. So knowing what we know about phosphorus internationally and locally, the Great Lakes, the Canada Water Agency, previously Environment and Climate Change Canada, put forward a call for proposals to help us reduce phosphorus through precision agriculture. The Essex Region Conservation Authority, as well as our partners at other CAs, applied for that funding. And the result is that between those 5 conservation authorities listed below, it's a $35 million investment over 4 years. One of the other pieces of funding that we're working with currently is also some work to help us improve habitat for species at risk. At-risk species are number over 500 in Canada. In the Essex region, we have 75 species at risk. 11 of those are globally rare. We know that some species are at risk because of habitat loss or human activities, climate change, or competition with invasive species. Our focus here is on aquatic species at risk. There are 2 freshwater mussel species, the lilliput and maple leaf, as well as 5 fish species at risk. And we know that there are known occurrences or critical habitat identified in the Roscombe River, Bow River, and River Canard. So we're trying to implement BMPs there to help with erosion because we know those species are very sensitive to sedimentation as well as nutrients. So the same BMPs that work for us for nutrients are also going to help our downstream aquatic species. To give you a sense of what this funding means for us, ERCA has been delivering the Clean Water Green Spaces program for quite some time. And we look at the last 25 years, and in that time, we were able to provide $2.5 million in funding for water quality improvement projects. So any of those sort of BMPs that we've been able to help support through funding. The funding that we receive for species at risk through the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is a 2-year grant of $80,000. So that would be kind of representative of one of the little pieces that help us make that 2.5 originally. The Canada Water Agency, through the Great Lakes Federal Ecosystem Initiative, which I'll call GLIFE probably going forward, in the next 4 years, that's an investment of $3.7 million just for BMP implementation. So that's funding that we get to provide to our farmers and rural landowners to help with phosphorus reduction. So to give you a visual, over those 25 years, we had to apply for several different funding sources with different timelines in order to get that $2.5 million. And that 2-year 80,000 would be an example of one of the pieces that we have to get. The grant that we have from the Canada Water Agency is a single funding source that covers us for 4 years and takes away a lot of the administrative burden for us so that we can put our focus on delivering the program. So the conservation authorities have all kind of taken these 3 strategic approaches to how we're going to deliver on this program. We're going to be offering the best management practices implementation through incentive programs. We're also increasing our strategic water quality monitoring network, and then doing outreach and education events and engagement events like we did on the 29th, and like you're seeing this recording now, to try to help engage that community. So for the Essex Region Conservation Authority, we put out our 2024-2025 incentive program, and we tried to cover as many things as we possibly could that might help us to reduce phosphorus. So you can see what we were offering there. And there's a few lessons learned for us on this, and you might see a couple of tweaks and changes in the 2025-2026 offering, and that's part of the feedback that we'd love to hear from you if you're watching this, if you want to get in touch with us and give us any feedback on the current program. And then we did hear it as well from our participants at that event. One thing to point out is that we did offer the equipment modifications, and we've since decided that the way that this makes the most sense is to bring together an impartial group of farmers, a small group, to help us to interpret those equipment modifications and needs so that we can make good decisions about those funding projects. So at this point, this is where my colleague Emma Arnu stepped in to kind of talk about her experiences working with our local farmers. And one of the things that she really wanted to highlight is the appreciation that we have for our farmers. You're not just putting in your applications and doing paperwork and whatever. You're sitting in your cabs of your trucks with us, and you're driving us around and showing us your projects and explaining to us why you made the decisions that you did or not other ones, and the lessons that you've learned along the way. And this is really important to us, and part of what we want to be able to do going forward is to tell your stories better. So just a really big appreciation for our community. So in our 2024-2025 year, we currently have 40 farmers approved to receive funding of $439,000, and that just keeps going up and up. We have over 4,000 acres of cover crop, 1,500 acres of strip till, 1,600 acres with cover crop plans, and almost 5,000 feet of header tiles, which is incredible. And we use coefficients that are provided to us to help us estimate phosphorus reduction from those activities. And we see that we're around 3,000 pounds of phosphorus reduced through these activities. The funding that we received to help us with our species at risk is what helped us to do 4 projects in the Canard River, and those are focused on more permanent things that are going to help us reduce erosion in the long run, so rock chutes, header tiles, buffers. One thing to really keep in mind as you look at this map is that if we hadn't received that GLIFE funding through the federal initiative, these would be the only BMPs we'd be able to talk to you about this year, because we didn't have any funding for any other programs. When we contrast that against the projects that we're able to do with that GLIFE funding, you can see just how much of a difference this makes for us. We're not focused in on any particular watershed with this program, because the funding isn't that restricted. We really want to try to reduce phosphorus everywhere. So that allows us to get into places that we haven't been as active. And you can see we need to do a little bit more activity up in the sort of lakeshore area and try to get more engagement there. But we see, cover crops, crop nutrient plants, strip till, those seem to be the main ones that happened this year. And part of that is timing, because we didn't get our grant until September. So, that delays when everybody can kind of do their planning. But really exciting too to see that people are already stacking BMPs as well. So when we split out into 4 groups, when you went to Emma's station, we talked about our grant program, the experience that you've had with the application process, what motivates you or prevents you from doing certain BMPs, any advice you have on our program going forward. So certainly invite you as you're watching this, if you have any additional feedback, to please provide that to us. The second strategy is strategic monitoring networks. So as I said, really important that we do that routine sampling and event sampling. The reason that runoff events are really important for us, if you look at these bottles here, they would sort of be, bottles from a routine would be at the start, and then as an event gets going and the water level is climbing in the river, you see more and more sedimentation, and total phosphorus is bound to sediment. So that's why we see those high concentrations here. And part of that is from picking sediment up from the surface and running off, and part of that is from scouring within the water, the stream bed itself. So this just highlights what we're able to do with the funding. So this is our existing monitoring network in the Essex region. If you want to take some time to really look at, when we do it and how we do it and what we're sampling, please go ahead and pause here and take a peek at this slide a little bit more. But the main take home from here is to look at these watersheds that are colored yellow. This is where we're able to do event-based sampling now. So we have ISCO auto samplers that allow us to collect data that's sufficient to calculate load. This Gliffy money that's given to us allows us to put ISCO stations as well in the Ruscombe and Kennard. So we'll be able to have a better idea of nutrient load from some of our bigger watersheds, which is huge for us. As well, it allows us to add in some additional sites so that we can get a better idea of what is going on throughout the watershed as well. With the species at risk funding that we received, we were able to, for the first time really ever, go out and do a good comprehensive look at where the freshwater mussels might be in our stream. So we were able to go to 10 different stations and look for freshwater mussels. This was also a really big opportunity for us to do some collaboration and partnership building with the Healthy Headwaters Lab and Caldwell First Nation and Dr. Trevor Pitcher's lab as well. With our fish monitoring. So really excited about this work and stay tuned to hear more results from that. So my colleague, Dr. Fabria, stepped in at this point to talk about the Healthy Headwaters Lab and what they do. And really at their core, the important thing of the science and the research that they do is that it's all about being co-produced. So really connecting in with the community, building that trust with the community, listening to, the types of research questions that people have here that we can use science to help answer. Their expertise is far-reaching. They've got vegetation experts, you've got people that do mussel work and benthic invertebrates, which are the little bugs that live in streams, understanding how different best management practices work, how different kinds of drain activities work. All these things help us to understand how our headwaters are working. One of the things that the Healthy Headwaters Lab really excels at is an understanding of those of carbon footprints and doing the dissolved organic matter analysis, which is way outside of my wheelhouse. So I won't do this justice, but I really just want to highlight that this is where Dr. Fabria's lab really excels. So Lauren Weller and Emily Brown, both through their research projects, looked at carbon and dissolved organic matter on a gradient of view, so from conventional agriculture all the way through to a rehabilitated forest. And they found these really unique carbon signatures in those different watersheds or different soil types rather, and really learned a lot about the rehabilitation that happened and that it really does take quite a long time for soil to recover. As well, the Healthy Headwaters Lab has really done a deep dive into the literature to have a better understanding of drain maintenance practices, and we have published a paper on that is a good synthesis of drainage activities. The Healthy Headwaters Lab also has a farm and freshwater ecology network, as well as a farm advisory board. And we're trying to kind of emulate that and utilize that farm advisory board kind of model so that we can hear more from our agricultural community and make sure that what we're offering is in line with what our community wants. They're also really focused on communicating science in a better way than peer-reviewed literature, which isn't super accessible to a lot of people. So really breaking that science down into a way that is digestible and meaningful. So they put out newsletters and different ways of sharing that information that you can check out, and we'll try to send out some links as well to that. So if you were at Catherine's station, that's where we talked about research and partnership, talking about the types of research projects that maybe you'd like to see or partnerships that you'd like to see strengthened, the types of programs that we might be able to foster, that kind of idea. The third strategy in general for our Gliffy program is the outreach and engagement. And again, that's part of what we're doing here. And we really want to be able to build out events that are meaningful to our community. And what are the topics that you want to hear about? And there'll be some of them where we'll be, you doing webinars and having in-person in a room meetings, but we really want to try to do a lot of this in the field and get people really in each other's fields and seeing what everybody's up to. So this is just a listing of the events that the conservation authorities have between January and March, which is, I think, very impressive. We received our funding in September of 2024, and this is how we were able to mobilize and plan these events. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and we're trying to work together as much as possible with the other conservation authorities so that we can promote each other's good work and try to make those, webinars and workshops available to our agricultural communities throughout Southwestern Ontario. And try to bring a lot of stuff, more local, because we know a lot of times the meetings are in Elora or Guelph or other places. So trying to bring the meetings closer to home and more meaningful to our communities here. You see, I highlighted in pink a webinar on February 25th. We are moving the date for that, but it's still happening. And that will be about applying cover crops through drones. So if you were over at Jess's station, that's where we talked about communication, and we really wanted to find out more about how you receive information about events or other agricultural news, social media platforms you might use, how you heard about the event that we held, any other suggestions that you might have as good ways to communicate with the community. Lastly, we talked about our future outreach plans, which you can see we've kind of thrown everything out here. The folks that are in this image here are from all the different conservation authorities. So they're the faces that you're going to see for these outreach events. And really our focus is to meet our farmers where they are and be in the places where they already are so that we can provide, that service and help to promote other things. So providing different types of services like webinar series and bringing in guest speakers, that sort of thing. One of the things we're really excited again is that storytelling opportunity to really make sure that we're bringing forward your stories and telling them in a good way. So if you were at my station on that day, we would have been talking about the events and learning opportunities and really wanting to hear from you about, guest speakers that you'd like or topics that you'd like to learn more about, the types of learning opportunities that you like, good examples you've seen, that sort of thing. So any feedback that you might have on that is still appreciated. You guys don't need to know this because this happened a week ago, but just to still let you know that this is sort of how the day went. We broke everybody out into 4 groups and they shuffled around between the 4 stations so that everybody had an opportunity to provide comment and feedback on each of the stations. We had note takers, and importantly, everything is anonymous. So we're just listening and taking things down so that we can build the best program possible. After we completed those 4 stations, everybody enjoyed a nice dinner and networking period, and then we did a really short report out and just allowed people time and space to comment back on what they heard. So just a thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation if you weren't able to attend on the 29th or if you wanted to hear it again. These are just some of the folks that were involved in the announcement of the program from all sorts of different agencies. Multiply this by 4 or 5, and you've got the number of people that are involved in this program. And that doesn't even include all of our practitioners that are doing the work. So really just a huge thank you for the ability to do this work.